The mirror that tried to steal my soul. It started like any other normal day. At least, it seemed like it would. I was browsing through an antique store in a quiet corner of the city. The kind of place that you only enter when you're in the mood to waste time, or maybe look for something unusual. Dusty shelves lined the walls, and the air was thick with the smell of aged wood and old books, a scent that seemed to cling to everything in the shop. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but my eyes drifted across the room, past the tarnished silverware, the yellowed paintings, and the odd assortment of trinkets. That's when I saw it. It was a mirror. At first, I thought it was just another antique, like the rest. But something about it pulled me in, almost as if it was calling me. The frame was intricate, crafted from dark wood, twisted in an ornate design that looked as though it belonged in a forgotten mansion. It stood against the wall, slightly crooked, the glass reflecting a distorted version of the store around it. My fingers brushed the edges of the frame, and a chill ran down my spine. I shook it off, blaming the cold air from the old creaky windows. But even as I turned away, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't like any other mirror I had seen before. No, this one felt different. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, that I was being overly dramatic. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The shopkeeper, a grizzled old man with a thick accent, noticed me staring at the mirror. "Ah, that one," he said with a knowing look in his eyes. "It's been here for years. Nobody's ever bought it, no matter how many times people come in here. Some say it's cursed, some say it's just an old relic. But I reckon it's best you leave it alone." I smiled, trying to brush off his warning. "Just a mirror, right?" I said with a shrug. But even as I spoke the words, a small part of me felt uneasy. I couldn't explain it, but I felt drawn to it. That night, after leaving the shop, I couldn't get the mirror out of my mind. I tried to tell myself I was being silly, that it was nothing more than a piece of glass, reflecting light in the same way every other mirror does. But I couldn't shake the thought. So, I returned the next day, paying the shopkeeper a small sum for the mirror. He didn't say anything as he wrapped it up and handed it to me. He simply gave me a look, one that made my stomach turn. When I got home, I placed the mirror in my living room against the far wall. It looked out of place, standing there among the modern furniture. Its dark, twisted frame seemed to swallow the light, casting strange shadows in the room. I tried to ignore it, thinking I'd get used to its presence. But over the next few days, strange things began to happen. It started with the whispering. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, creaks and groans from the walls. But then, one night, as I sat in my armchair reading a book, I heard it. A faint whispering sound, coming from the direction of the mirror. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. The whispers were low and indecipherable, as if the glass was trying to speak. I tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to my imagination running wild. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. And then, it wasn't just the whispers. It was the shadows. I remember the first time I noticed it. I was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie before going out. I wasn't paying much attention to the reflection. My mind was elsewhere on the things I needed to do, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. It was a shadow, moving behind me. At first, I thought it was just my own, but when I turned around, the room was empty. There was no one there, but the shadow in the mirror didn't disappear. It lingered, dark and twisted, standing just behind me, as if it was waiting for me to notice. I turned away quickly, my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was wrong with that mirror. Something dark. That night, things took a darker turn. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving. My room was cold, the air thick and still. I lay still in my bed, my eyes darting around the room, trying to make sense of the strange noise. It came from the living room. Slowly, I got out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floor. I crept into the hallway, my breath shallow, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had to know what was happening. When I reached the living room, the first thing I noticed was the mirror. It was no longer crooked. It stood straight, reflecting the room with an eerie clarity. But there was something wrong. The reflection wasn't quite right. The shadows in the mirror seemed deeper, darker, as if something was waiting just beyond the glass. I stepped closer, my heart hammering in my chest. And that's when I saw it. In the reflection, I wasn't alone. Behind me, standing just out of reach, was a figure. A man, his features distorted and twisted like something out of a nightmare. His eyes were black, hollow, staring at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I tried to turn around, but when I did, the room was empty. There was no one behind me. I turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, and now he was smiling. I stumbled back, my mind racing. My breath was shallow, panic rising in my chest. What was happening? Why was this thing in the mirror smiling at me? I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and I screamed, spinning around. But there was nothing there. I was alone. The figure in the mirror, however, wasn't. For weeks, I tried to avoid the mirror, but it was impossible. It felt like it was always watching me, waiting for me to come back. The whispers grew louder. The shadows became more persistent. I couldn't escape it. No matter where I went in the house, it followed me, lingering in the corner of my vision. One night, after another restless sleep, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get rid of the mirror. I gathered all my strength, lifted the heavy frame, and carried it outside, ready to throw it away. But as soon as I stepped out into the yard, I felt it, an overwhelming force pulling me back toward the house. The mirror, it didn't want to leave. I dropped it. It shattered on the ground, the glass splintering into 1,000 pieces. But even as it broke, I heard something, a scream, sharp and deafening, coming from the shards of glass. It was like a voice, but not quite human. It was a sound I can never forget. The mirror had been alive. That was the last time I ever saw it. I burned the pieces of glass, but I'm not sure if it really worked. The feeling never left me. I can still feel it, even now. The whispers, the shadows, that thing in the mirror. It's out there, somewhere, waiting, watching. And if you ever find yourself drawn to a mirror that feels wrong, that calls to you in the dark, just remember, some things are better left undisturbed, because once you invite them in, you might never escape.